The night the operation was approved, the task force room felt more like a confession booth than a command center. A dim yellow lamp flickered over the briefing table, casting long shadows over photos, maps, timestamps, and dossiers arranged with ritualistic precision. The air hummed with the low buzz of an AC unit struggling to survive its final summer. And somewhere in the corner, a leaking pipe tapped a slow, nervous rhythm. It wasn't the kind of room where justice was planned. It was the kind where justice was bargained with. And that was exactly what undercover work always felt like. A trade, a compromise, a silent agreement between morality and necessity. Detective Adrian Cole stood at the head of the table, gripping its edge as if grounding himself before stepping into a freefall. He had gone undercover before, but this time the stakes were different. This time, it wasn't about infiltrating a small drug ring or a stolen goods pipeline. This time, he was stepping inside a multi-state trafficking syndicate known only as the Orchard, a network so buried in secrecy that even the federal agencies investigating them had little more than whispers and blurry CCTV stills to go on. And whispers were not enough for prosecution. Whispers didn't hold up in court. Undercover operatives did, but they also bled, vanished, or died doing it. Captain Mara Delaney, a woman whose composure rarely cracked even under gunfire, laid out the final diagram, a web of names, some real, some code, most unknown. Adrian's alias was printed neatly at the center, Elias Ward, ex-convict, specializes in stolen electronics. Reputation? Volatile. Past arrests? Fabricated but convincing, right down to the mugshots photoshopped by the tech department. As she spoke, Adrian's eyes drifted to his own fabricated criminal record. In another life, he could have been this man. The line between who he was and who he had to become blurred with every undercover case, and each time, returning to the surface felt a little less certain. The psychological toll wasn't written anywhere in the official documents. They didn't keep a file on what happened to your identity when you lived too long behind another one. They didn't record the nightmares, or the blurred loyalties, or the creeping fear that maybe, just maybe, the mask fit a little too well. But the deeper the syndicate, the deeper the deception needed to go. The room fell quiet when the screen flickered on, revealing surveillance footage, grainy clips of unidentified men exchanging packages at docks, a warehouse full of crates with serial numbers filed off, and a single, chilling frame, a man kneeling, tied, head down, with two Orchard operatives behind him. No context, no audio, just fear frozen in time. This, Delaney said, tapping the image, is why we're doing this. They don't negotiate, they don't leave witnesses, and we cannot get to the top unless someone is inside. Adrian inhaled deeply, letting the weight settle. He understood the stakes, but understanding didn't erase the fear. Undercover officers didn't die heroically. They died quietly. Sometimes their bodies were never found. Sometimes no one even knew who they died as, the real them, or the alias they played. Still, he nodded. "When do I go in?" "Tonight," Delaney answered. "You'll meet the contact at a roadside bar just outside the interstate. He thinks you're coming alone. Keep it that way." Adrian blinked. "No backup?" "They'll be watching from a distance, but if things go wrong, there might not be time to intervene. You know how these people operate." He did. He remembered every close call, every moment when survival hinged on a lie delivered convincingly enough to pass. Undercover work wasn't about bravery. It was about performance. And bad performances got you killed. Hours later, the bar sat alone in the middle of a vast dark stretch of highway, a neon open sign buzzing like a dying insect. The parking lot was half dirt, half asphalt, littered with crushed beer cans and cigarette butts. Adrian sat behind the wheel of his beat-up sedan, part of his cover, and rehearsed the details one last time. Alias, backstory, criminal contacts, fabricated betrayals, all designed to make him look desperate enough, useful enough, and dangerous enough for the orchard to take him in. He stepped out, the echo of gravel crunching beneath his boots following him to the door. The bar smelled like stale smoke and cheap liquor, an authentic background for people who didn't want their conversations remembered. A few heads turned as he entered, but most returned to their drinks. At the far end, a man with a scar running from his eyebrow to his jawline waited swirling ice cubes in a glass of whiskey. He didn't look up when Adrian sat down, but the tension in the air tightened like a drawn bow. "You're late," the scarred man murmured. Adrian shrugged. "Highway traffic." "At this hour?" Adrian met his gaze without flinching. "You want the job done or a punctual boyfriend?" The man smirked, but only slightly. "You've got attitude. They said you might." "They?" "The orchard." The way he said it, casual, unafraid, sent a small chill down Adrian's spine. His informants had never heard members speak the name openly. Either this man was deeply trusted or extremely expendable. "You've been causing trouble," the contact continued. "Cracked open a warehouse in Detroit, and you shot a man in Cincinnati." "He shot at me first," Adrian replied smoothly. "I just don't miss." The man stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to peel away the layers of his face and examine the truth underneath. Adrian held the gaze. Calm, cold, convincing. The scarred man finally leaned back. "You'll do." Adrian didn't exhale until the man slid a burner phone across the table. "You'll get a message within 24 hours. Don't call anyone. Don't go anywhere. If they like you, you'll meet them. If not, well, you won't hear back, and that's good news." Adrian picked up the phone, pocketed it, and stood. "If they're testing me," he said, "tell them I don't break." "Everyone breaks," the scarred man said quietly. "The orchard just likes to see how much pressure it takes." As Adrian stepped out into the cold night, he felt the old familiar sensation settle over him, the quiet terror of stepping into the unknown, and the adrenaline-fueled certainty that there was no turning back now. Undercover work was like walking into darkness with a match. Eventually, the flame burned out. The question was whether you found your way before it did. Tonight, he had taken the first step. Tomorrow, he would enter their world fully, and the deeper he went, the harder it would be to return. The message came at 3:14 a.m., when the sky was at its darkest and even the street dogs had stopped barking. Adrian had been sitting on the edge of the motel bed, fully dressed, staring at the burner phone on the nightstand like it was a venomous snake waiting to strike. When it finally vibrated, one single buzz, no caller ID, no preview, he felt his pulse immediately spike. He opened it. Address: 0400. Come alone. A pinned location blinked beneath the text, an abandoned lumber mill on the outskirts of town. No signature, no instructions, no second chance. The orchard didn't waste words. He left the motel without turning on the lights, moving like a ghost passing through a temporary existence. Undercover officers learn not to root themselves anywhere, not emotionally, not physically, not mentally. Attachment meant hesitation, and hesitation meant death. As he stepped into the cold night, the street lamps flickered above like dying stars, each one humming with a faint electrical buzz. The roads were empty at this hour, washed blue by moonlight and lined with boarded-up storefronts that looked more like gravestones than buildings. The lumber mill loomed at the end of a dirt road, its massive silhouette rising from the fog like a carcass left behind by some industrial giant. Its metal walls were rusted through in places. Its conveyor belts hung slack like snapped tendons. The whole place smelled of damp wood, oil, and something vaguely metallic, iron or blood. It was hard to tell. He killed the engine and waited. The only sound was the ticking of the cooling engine and the distant howl of an owl somewhere deep in the tree line. Exactly at 0400, a black SUV rolled into view, its headlights off. It stopped 10 feet away. The driver never stepped out. Instead, the rear door opened with a soft click. Adrian approached slowly, hands visible, posture relaxed but alert. Undercover work meant projecting confidence even when fear was chewing at your insides. He slid into the back seat. 3 men sat inside. Not one of them looked at him. The SUV began moving immediately. The man closest to him, built like a cinder block, neck as thick as Adrian's thigh, scribbled something into a notebook without glancing up. The man in the front passenger seat adjusted a radio dial. The driver kept his gaze fixed forward, expression blank. No one spoke. Not a greeting, not a test question, not a threat. Silence was part of the ritual. They drove for nearly an hour, deeper into an area where the roads turned to gravel and the gravel turned to mud. More than once, Adrian considered the possibility that they were driving him out somewhere to kill him. It wasn't paranoia. It was standard operational probability. Finally, the SUV slowed. Ahead, barely visible through the trees, was a warehouse lit by a single generator-powered floodlight. 3 guards stood outside, armed, hooded, motionless. The orchard wasn't hiding. Not here. That meant they felt safe. That meant this was territory they controlled. Adrian stepped out with the others. The warehouse's metal door groaned as one guard rolled it upward. Inside was a cavernous space filled with crates stacked like monolithic blocks, forming aisles and corridors that looked like a maze built from illicit cargo. The smell of pine from the crates mixed with diesel fumes and gun oil, creating a scent that felt both industrial and predatory. A woman stood at the center of the warehouse. Sharp features, black leather gloves, a long coat that brushed the concrete floor. She had an aura that froze the air around her, an authority so cold it radiated. "This is Elias Ward?" she asked, her voice a smooth blade. The block-necked man nodded. She circled Adrian slowly, not touching, just observing. Predators recognize predators. "She said she heard you don't scare easy." "I heard you like people who don't." She smiled faintly. "Attitude. Good." Her gaze locked onto his with unsettling intensity. For a moment it felt as if she saw right through him, past the alias, past the facade, past the rehearsed criminal background, and into the beating heart beneath. He kept his breathing steady, letting Elias Ward settle into his bones. "What do you want from us?" she asked. I answered without hesitation. "Money, protection, and work. I hear you have plenty of that." "What do you offer?" "Skills, loyalty if paid, violence if needed." Her eyebrow lifted slightly. "Violence is always needed." She gestured for him to follow. They walked deeper into the warehouse until they reached a door leading to a small office. The woman entered first. Inside, a single bulb dangled over a desk littered with files and a laptop displaying spreadsheets with coded entries. A camera in the corner hummed softly. "You're going to be tested." "By who?" "By me." She nodded toward the laptop screen. A video began to play. A man tied to a chair, blood streaked down his chin, his eyes swollen shut. A hooded figure pacing behind him. This man stole from us. He lied. Worse, he talked. The pacing figure stepped into frame. A knife glinted in his hand. "You want to work for us," she continued. "Prove you're willing to do what your record claims you've done." She reached into a drawer and slid something across the desk. A handgun. Loaded. Adrian didn't move. This wasn't a real test of violence. It was a test of ethics. A test designed to see if he would break, hesitate, look away. They didn't need him to pull the trigger. They needed to see whether he could. And Adrian had been trained for exactly this moment. He picked up the gun, waited, checked the chamber with the ease of muscle memory. He pointed it at the screen, then at the floor, then at her. Her lips curved, not in fear, in approval. "You understand pressure, but don't worry. You won't be killing anyone today." She took the gun back. "You'll get your first assignment tomorrow.
For now, we need to know, can you keep your mouth shut? Can you disappear? Can you be useful? I didn't come here to waste your time. Good, because the orchard has no patience for dead weight. She stood, signaling the end of the test. But as Adrian turned, she added, "Oh, Elias, one more thing." He paused. "If you lie to me," she said calmly, "I'll know, and I'll bury you where no badge will ever find you." A chill slid down his spine, not because of the threat, but because she wasn't bluffing. The orchard didn't threaten. They followed through. He left the warehouse escorted, the cold dawn just beginning to touch the treetops as the SUV returned him to the pickup point. He was officially inside, but every second from here forward would be a countdown toward exposure, capture, or death. He whispered to himself as he walked back to his car, "Stay, Elias. Stay alive." The wind answered with a low moan through the trees, as if reminding him, in undercover work, the mask wasn't something you wore. It was something that slowly replaced your face.
The next night arrived with a kind of unnatural stillness, the kind that settles over a place right before a storm breaks. Adrian, still buried in his Elias Ward persona, drove through the outskirts of town following another pin drop location sent at 1:02 a.m. This time, the message contained only 3 words: "Be ready tonight." He had spent the entire day running surveillance checks, making sure he wasn't followed, making sure his cover wasn't already compromised, making sure the orchard's growing suspicion hadn't begun tightening around him like a noose. Undercover work was a war against paranoia, but paranoia was often the only thing keeping you alive. By the time he reached the meeting point, an old canning factory half swallowed by forest, the clock read 1:59 a.m. The fog hung thick around the broken windows and rusted loading bays, wrapping the entire structure like a shroud. Exactly at 2 o'clock, 2 trucks rolled up. The same block-necked bruiser from before hopped out first, flicking a cigarette away. "Ward," he grunted, "you're riding with me." He didn't wait for a reply. Inside the truck, Adrian tried reading the man's posture, his tone, his silence. Something was different tonight, tense, urgent, even for a criminal enterprise as violent as the orchard. The bruiser didn't speak until they were deep in the woods, driving along a rough, unmarked path that barely counted as a road. "We got a problem," he finally muttered. Adrian stayed silent. Silence was safer than questions in the criminal world. "There's a competitor crew moving product through our routes. They think they can cut into orchard territory. The boss wants to send a message." A message in criminal slang rarely meant words. It meant destruction, fear, bodies. Adrian kept Elias Ward's expression neutral, nodding slowly. "And you," the bruiser continued, "get to prove you ain't a liability. A test. A violent one." He had predicted this escalation. The orchard was too organized, too paranoid, too blood-driven not to. But still, his pulse climbed. This wasn't training. This wasn't a simulation. He was heading into real danger, surrounded by real criminals, with no backup allowed until the sting operation matured. When the truck rolled to a stop, Adrian saw them. 4 men wearing balaclavas, unloading crates from an unmarked van. Their flashlights cut across the fog like swinging blades. The bruiser killed the engine. "Those are the idiots stepping on our territory. We're going to make sure they regret it." He tossed Adrian a crowbar. A crowbar, not a gun. Close range, personal. A loyalty test, soaked in blood. Adrian's mind raced. The real Elias Ward would probably smile, maybe even laugh. But Adrian, the detective buried underneath, had sworn an oath to do the opposite. He couldn't harm innocent men, even if they were criminals. But if he refused, the orchard would kill him on the spot. If he hesitated, they would notice. And if they noticed, his real identity would be dead before dawn. This was the moral vice of undercover work: kill to stay alive long enough to bring them down, or die before making a difference. The bruiser got out first. Adrian followed. The fog swallowed them as they approached the rival crew. "You boys lost?" the bruiser called out, voice dripping with menace. The rival men froze. One dropped a crate. Another reached for something inside his jacket. "Careful," Adrian warned silently in his mind. "Don't escalate. Don't make this worse." But criminals followed instinct, not strategy. One of them pulled a knife. That was all the excuse the orchard needed. The bruiser slammed into the first man like a truck, cracking the crowbar across his ribs with a sickening crunch. A second orchard enforcer rushed the man with the knife, tackling him into the mud. The others joined in. Violence exploded in the clearing, raw, chaotic, animalistic. Adrian stood on the outskirts of the fight, gripping the crowbar, heart pounding as screams and thuds filled the night. "Ward!" the bruiser barked. "Get in there!" Adrian's jaw tightened. Elias Ward wouldn't freeze, but Adrian, a sworn officer, couldn't deliver a fatal blow. He scanned the chaos quickly and spotted an opening. One of the rival men wasn't fighting. He was fleeing, stumbling into the trees. Adrian caught up with him, grabbed his arm, and shoved him down without using lethal force. He swung the crowbar near his head, smashing it into the ground beside him, a violent action without killing intent. The fleeing man froze, believing he'd been spared by luck or mercy. Adrian leaned closer, whispering just loud enough, "Stay down. Don't move. Don't die today." The man nodded rapidly, trembling. Adrian looked back. The bruiser saw the swing, saw the takedown, saw the man pinned, and that was enough. "Ward!" the bruiser shouted again. "We're done here." The orchard didn't kill the rival crew. Not tonight. They injured them, scared them, and made sure the message landed hard and bloody. But murder wasn't the goal. Intimidation was. As they walked back to the truck, the bruiser clapped Adrian on the shoulder. "You got guts. The boss'll like that." Adrian exhaled, slowly, relief washing through him. His careful balance, appearing violent without committing to it, had worked. But the night wasn't over. When they returned to the canning factory, the woman from before, the orchard's ice-veined leader, was waiting for them by a metal table stacked with documents and burner phones. "You passed," she said before anyone could speak. Her tone was unreadable, as if passing wasn't praise, but a further sentence. "Now, you get a real job, and this one, you can't fail." She slid a manila folder across the table. The fluorescent bulb above flickered ominously. Inside were photographs, grainy surveillance stills, maps, coded manifests, and one image that drained the blood from Adrian's face. A familiar face. A cop. A detective from Adrian's own task force. The woman leaned in. "He's been sniffing around our operations. We need him removed." Adrian's heartbeat became a roar in his ears. A kill order. On a fellow officer. On someone who probably had no idea he was marked for death. The orchard leader studied Adrian's expression closely. "You know him?" she asked. The question was a blade. The wrong answer meant death. The right answer meant orchestrating another man's murder. Adrian forced Elias Ward's cold smirk on his face. "No," he lied, "but I can take care of him." Her eyes glittered with dark pleasure. "Good. You start tomorrow." The bruiser grinned. "Told you he was the real deal." Adrian tucked the folder under his arm, gave a nod, and walked out into the night. The moment he was alone, beneath the looming shadow of the forest, the facade cracked briefly. His jaw clenched, his breath trembled.
He had crossed a threshold, not just deeper into the orchard, but into a lethal moral chasm where one wrong move could get him or a fellow officer slaughtered. He whispered, barely audible, "I'll get you out of this. Both of us." But the trees didn't answer this time. No wind, no owls, just silence. The kind of silence that presses down with weight and promise. Tomorrow, the operation would reach a point of no return, and Adrian would face the deadliest undercover dilemma of his career.
Rain pressed against the window of the safe house like a steady whisper, a constant lull meant to hide the storm rising beneath the surface. Detective Mara Heyer finally closed the classified file, letting the weight of the words sink into her bones. She had spent weeks undercover as Nadia, a courier inside Basalt Ring, the most elusive black market syndicate in the Northern Corridor. But what began as a tightly controlled sting operation had spiraled into something far more dangerous than any briefing had prepared her for. Now, the deeper she went, the more she felt the operation was turning around to look back at her. The room was dim, lit only by a single red lamp glowing like an ember. It cast long shadows across the peeling wallpaper and the maps pinned to the wall. Each red thread connected the names of men and women who vanished without any public trace. The air smelled of damp wood, cigarette ash, and the faint metallic tang of paranoia. Mara pressed her fingers against her eyes, reminding herself that she still belonged to the real world outside this nightmare, though each day that world felt further away. She was supposed to be the hunter. She was supposed to blend in, gather evidence, and walk out when the operation met its objectives. But now, things were shifting. Tiny inconsistencies, strange looks from the wrong people, instructions arriving late, vague, or contradictory. And worst of all, she had begun to feel that she was not the only undercover operative inside Basalt Ring, but whoever the second one was, they might not be working for law enforcement at all. Hours earlier, while returning from a drop with encrypted ledgers hidden in the lining of her coat, she had caught a glimpse of a man in a gray hood watching her from the reflection of a window. When she turned around, he was gone. The city streets had been empty except for the rain, yet the sensation stayed, the unmistakable feeling of footsteps echoing at her heels. Mara leaned back, staring up at the cracked ceiling. In undercover work, paranoia was practically part of the job. You learned to second-guess the second guesses. But this felt different. This felt planned. A soft knock at the door jolted her upright. 3 taps, then a pause, then 2. The code. She unlatched the door, but kept her weight braced, ready. Agent Rafiq entered, shaking off his coat. His face was stern, eyes darkened with sleepless worry. "You're late," Mara murmured. "I know," he said. "There were complications." There were always complications now. He handed her a small, encrypted tablet. New orders. Her stomach tightened. She unlocked it, the screen flickering to life with a message stamped in bold red. "Target identified. Seize operational ledger tonight. No extensions. Do not fail." Mara exhaled slowly. "They want me to extract the ledger tonight? That warehouse is crawling with Basalt's inner circle. I barely managed to get out last time." "The directive came from above," Rafiq said quietly. "Very above." She understood what he meant. Command levels where decisions were rarely questioned and risks were easily justified on paper. "It's too soon," she whispered. "They don't understand how unstable things are inside. Someone is tracking me." Rafiq's jaw tightened. "We don't have the luxury to wait anymore. Basalt is about to move their entire network offshore. If that ledger disappears, the last 2 years of surveillance vanish with it." Mara stood at the table, hands gripping the edge until her fingers hurt. Being undercover wasn't just putting yourself in danger. It was trading your identity piece by piece until there was barely anything left at the end, just a shadow who answered to both sides and belonged to neither. She forced herself to focus. "Fine. If I go in tonight, I need extraction protocol ready. No delays, no miscommunication.
If I call in the green signal, I want that van behind the east gate immediately. Rafik hesitated. What? She asked sharply. He took a breath. There was another directive, secondary objective. Her pulse slowed, heavy and cold. Tell me. They want you to confirm whether another undercover agent is embedded inside Basalt Ring. Mara's words caught in her throat. Of course, she had suspected it, but she hadn't expected the agency to give an official directive. And if I find them? Rafik shut his eyes briefly as if the answer hurt. Identify them, determine loyalty, and... He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Mara's breath thinned. Ethical lines were etched into every manual, every protocol, every oath she had sworn. Undercover agents were supposed to protect each other, never eliminate each other, but the unspoken truth lingered. When deep operations collided, identities tangled, and loyalties blurred, sometimes only one walked out. Understood, she said quietly, though her chest tightened. Rafik placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Be careful, Mara, please. For a moment, the rain was the only sound between them. Hours later, the warehouse district stretched before her, silent, wet, and glowing with dim, red industrial lights. The air was thick with diesel fumes and the hum of distant generators. Her boots splashed softly through puddles as she approached the side entrance she had used during her last infiltration. She kept to the shadows, her breathing steady and shallow. Every nerve was sharp. The brick walls felt colder than usual. The chain-link fences seemed tighter. It was a place that didn't want witnesses, only ghosts. Once inside, she moved past rusted machinery and stacks of unmarked crates. The ledger was hidden in a locked office on the second floor. She knew the route, the timing, the blind spots. She had memorized every corner. But tonight, something felt shifted. Wrong. Halfway up the stairs, she froze. Footsteps. Soft, controlled, deliberate. Too careful to belong to any of Basalt's guards. Mara pulled back into the dark, pressing her body against the cold metal railing. Her heartbeat drummed inside her ears. Then she saw him. A figure in a gray hood gliding silently through the walkway below. His posture was poised, calculated. He moved like someone who understood surveillance, understood danger, understood her. It was him, the watcher, the one she feared was tailing her. He paused, lifting his head slightly as if sensing her presence. Mara didn't breathe. A long moment stretched between them, taut as wire. Then he vanished down the corridor. She waited until the silence returned before moving again, each step slower, each shadow heavier. She reached the office and began working the lock, the cold metal biting at her fingertips. The door clicked open. Inside, the room was dim, lit only by a single red emergency light. Papers were scattered across the desk, and in the center, exactly where she expected it, sat the operational ledger, a thick, encrypted book disguised as a standard cargo manifest. She stepped toward it. A voice cut through the silence behind her. Don't move. Her blood chilled. She turned slowly. The man in the gray hood stood in the doorway. For a long moment, neither spoke. Rain hammered the roof above, a distant storm drowning the world. Then, he reached up and lowered his hood. Mara's breath caught. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't the Salt's enforcer. He was an officer. A fellow undercover operative, but not from her agency. "Who are you?" she whispered.
Someone who was told the same thing you were, to retrieve the ledger, to identify the other infiltrator, to ensure the mission succeeds, even if things turn complicated. Their eyes locked in a heavy silence. They were mirrors. Two shadows sent by two different chains of command, converging on the same target with the same secret orders. Ethics bent, protocols blurred, risks multiplied. And now the sting operation had become something far darker, a collision course between operatives forced into impossible choices they never agreed to make. Mara's voice trembled just slightly. So what happens now? He stepped forward, calm, measured. That depends. On what? On whether your agency is willing to pull you out alive. The lights flickered. Somewhere in the distance, metal clanged, guards approaching. The sting operation was no longer just dangerous. It was detonating. The warehouse walls felt smaller, the rain louder, the danger closer. Mara's fingers hovered near the ledger. The red light pulsed like a heartbeat, illuminating her face with every ominous flash. Whatever happens next, the undercover man said quietly, we're running out of time. And for the first time, Mara realized that the most dangerous enemy inside this operation wasn't Basalt Ring, or the criminals, or the betrayal waiting in the dark. It was the agencies who sent them here, into a maze where survival was optional, where ethics were expendable, where sting operations demanded sacrifices no one ever saw in the reports. She lifted the ledger with trembling hands. Then we move, she whispered. And the storm outside finally broke. The storm arrived in the early morning hours, sweeping across the city like something sent to cleanse all the sins that had been quietly accumulating in forgotten corners. Sheets of rain hammered the rusted rooftops, transforming the streets into a maze of shimmering reflections. In the center of that storm, an unmarked black sedan rolled slowly toward the field office, its windows fogged, its engine groaning as though exhausted from everything it had been forced to carry. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the breath of someone who had spent too long pretending to be someone else. Ethan stared at his hands, palms trembling against his thighs, still stained with traces of someone he no longer wanted to remember. He had survived the sting. The criminals were in custody. The files were secured. The operation, on paper, was a success. But inside him, something cold had taken root. Something that had been planted quietly during those long months in which he had abandoned his real name, replaced by a persona that had grown too natural, too comfortable, too believable. A persona that didn't disappear the moment he removed the fake ID from his wallet. The hours ticked forward, and yet the echo of that other self moved through him like a shadow he couldn't outrun. When he arrived at the office, no one greeted him, not because they didn't care, but because they knew better. They understood the look in his eyes, even from a distance, that vague glassiness that agents carried when they crossed an invisible line and had not yet figured out how to come back. The walls seemed to close in as he walked, the buzzing fluorescent lights flickering just slightly, as if sensing the unease he carried deep in his bones. He was summoned to a small conference room, where the lead officials waited for him, men and women who had never once stepped into the lion's den, yet held the authority to judge the ones who did. They sat around the table, looking crisp, polished, untouched by the ugliness of the world. The contrast made him feel even dirtier. They asked him to recount everything, every detail, every conversation, every strategic deception, every moment of danger. They asked him to justify the decisions he made inside that motel room, including the one that still echoed inside him with the sharpness of a blade, the split-second choice that determined who lived and who didn't. The choice that had saved the sting, but had erased any illusion that undercover work was just a job.
He answered their questions carefully, forcing back the tremor in his voice, the ones that threatened to expose how deeply those events had carved their way into him. When he finished, the room fell into silence, each official scribbling notes, nodding to themselves, analyzing his trauma like an equation. Then they delivered their verdict. He had done everything right. There would be no disciplinary review, no internal investigation, no questions about ethics or morality or necessary force. The operation had succeeded. That was enough. But outside the conference room, Ethan stood still in the hallway, unable to feel relief. Success had never felt so hollow. He walked to the locker room, opened the metal door, and stared at the remnants of the life he had abandoned for the operation. His own clothes, his own wallet, his own phone still filled with unread messages from people who thought he had been simply on assignment, people who thought he was unchanged, people who didn't know how close he had come to losing himself, not physically, but spiritually. He changed out of the clothes he had worn as another man. They fell to the floor like the shedding of a second skin. As he buttoned his own shirt, he caught his reflection in the small mirror above the sink. His eyes were darker, not tired, hardened. There was something missing in his face, something subtle, yet undeniable, a softness that undercover agents often lost, replaced by the quiet weight of all the lies they had told, all the roles they had played, all the friendships they had faked. A knock echoed softly on the doorframe. It was Mara, the handler who had guided him through the operation from behind a computer screen, through encrypted messages, through calls he would never be able to mention publicly. She stepped inside, her face drawn with worry. She didn't speak first. She simply stood beside him, watching the rain dripping down the small window. "You made it out," she said finally. But her tone was gentle, as though she were offering condolences instead of congratulations. He didn't answer. He didn't know how. She waited a moment, then asked the question that truly mattered, the question no official had bothered to pose. "Do you feel like you can come back from this?" He looked at her reflection in the mirror. She wasn't judging him. She wasn't analyzing him. She was simply asking the one thing that would define whether he could continue being an agent or whether this operation had quietly broken something inside him. "I don't know," he whispered. Mara nodded, as though she expected the answer. She told him that undercover agents often felt disoriented afterward, detached, like their identity had blurred into something unrecognizable. She spoke about doubts, nightmares, guilt that clung to the ribs, the constant fear that the persona they built might surface in moments of weakness. She told him it was normal, but normal didn't mean easy. As she left, Ethan returned to the mirror, the silence around him tightening. A storm raged outside, the thunder rolling like something ancient and angry. It reminded him of the motel room, the gunshot, the blur of motion, the moment when instinct had taken over, when survival weighed heavier than morality. He needed air. He stepped outside into the storm, letting the cold rain soak through his shirt as he walked across the parking lot. The water ran down his face, indistinguishable from the sweat and fear still clinging to him. The city around him looked different, muted, distant, as though he were seeing it through a different set of eyes. Maybe he was. Maybe going undercover meant sacrificing a version of himself that he might never fully recover. He walked until he reached the edge of the river that cut through the city. The water churned violently, smashing against the rocks, frothing as though trying to claw its way free from the banks holding it down. He stood there watching it, realizing he understood its anger. A single question hovered in his mind. If the operation had gone wrong, if the suspect had survived, if the gun had slipped, if the sting had failed, would anyone have cared about the ethics they were now praising? He doubted it. Undercover work wasn't about justice, not really. It was about results, and results had a cost. As the rain intensified, something inside him slowly uncoiled, Not relief, but acceptance. He had survived. He had done what he believed he needed to do, and though the weight of it would stay with him, pressing coldly against his ribs, he understood that facing it was part of the job, part of choosing to step into darkness so others wouldn't have to. When he finally turned back toward the field office, the storm had begun to ease. The clouds thinned, letting faint streaks of dawn slip across the sky. It wasn't warm, it wasn't hopeful, but it was enough to walk toward. Behind him, the river roared. Ahead of him, the quiet halls of the office waited. Somewhere in between, he tried to remember who he really was. But even if he couldn't yet find that answer, he knew one thing for certain. No undercover agent ever walked away unchanged, and he was no exception.